There's something for everyone on the PFC Entertainment Network. On Mondays, it's On That Note with Kristen Watt. The Klaus to the Heart podcast is on Tuesdays. Jason Klaus and Sean Grugel hosts Power Trippin' Through the 80s on Wednesdays and The Hot Tag on Thursdays. The Potato Pals Perspective drops on Fridays. Alternating weekends, you'll hear The Real Podcast with Amy Sheridan, Pro Wrestling Rewind, The Klaus and Q Show, and Shh, We Don't Talk About That. Find all of our great shows wherever you listen to podcasts. Check PFC Network. Net for all the latest info on all things on the Pure Fury Creations Entertainment Network.
You're listening to the Pure Fury Creations Entertainment Network. The views and opinions expressed on this episode are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or philosophies of the PFC Entertainment Network or any of the affiliates that make this show possible. This show has also been rated M for mature audiences only.
We don't talk about that.
And welcome back to Shh, We Don't Talk About That. This week, we are talking about controlling pessimistic thoughts using CPT.
Yes.
So there's a lot more that goes on with that, but we like the play on words with CPT. I like that title that you came up with.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
It's
I
quite
had to
brilliant.
Google some words.
You have to Google some words. It's quite brilliant. So, you did a good job.
Thanks.
So that's our topic this week, and it's the last of our modalities, which I personally am super excited about. It's also the last of the types of therapy that I have personally gone through and experienced, not that necessarily that I've read about or that I've heard about or been familiar with, but that I've personally experienced the program. And
Yes.
this one was a little different just because it was my counselor that I've had for a long time who was doing continuing education. And he came to me and said, I really want to do this CPT course, but I need somebody who is, pretty stable and strong and able to kind of check me, but as I can check them. And it was such an ego boost, to be perfectly honest, but
For sure.
it was one of those like, wow, look at how far you've come moments, where I got to take a step back and kind of survey my kingdom that I had built, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I started with Dave. So it was not as stringent as maybe somebody who is certified and trained in CPT
Sure.
versus Dave, who was going through it and videotaping it and then being corrected. But we did follow the program. I used an app called CPT Coach. It's free. You can download it. I have mixed feelings about it. I have a love-hate relationship with it, but it was what I used. You have your own personal experience through just your education that is going to give us the background and stuff, and then we'll talk more about like my experience with using CPT. But I'd love to hear like how CPT came to be, because experiencing it is one thing, and it's really been beneficial, but I'd love to know like, how did we get here?
Good question.
Okay.
I have answers.
Oh, that's excellent.
Right? I have answers.
That's kind of why we're friends. It works. Okay, so anyway.
So CPT was developed by Dr. Patricia Rasick. I don't know if I said that right. Don't judge me. In the late 80s, and it was created for victims of sexual trauma. So anybody going through sexual trauma, she created this program to help move victims through that traumatic experience in a way that allowed them to decrease all of those kind of post-traumatic stress symptoms that go on in the body. CPT particularly targets the brain's fear response. And our fear response is what gets activated when we are in a traumatic event, which is why we can have the nightmares or the increased startle effect or the hypervigilance. Like all of those things are activated because it's out of fear. CPT focuses on stuck points. So where we get stuck in our own self, in our own thoughts, our feelings, our memories, those stuck points are keys. Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And then we want to be able to challenge those distorted cognitions that kind of surround those stuck points. So the negative beliefs that you have about yourself that go with those stuck points, we want to target those, because if we can get rid of those negative beliefs and put that somewhere else, particularly on said perpetrator, said experience of the traumatic event, and less on us, then we're no longer carrying that in our body, physiologically, emotionally, psychologically. The goal overall is to reduce and eliminate the stuck points, allowing the client to move through the trauma itself using exposure and cognitive therapy over 12 sessions, which comes out in like 6 different phases. The biggest thing, because it was successful, and by successful, they looked at the longevity of the study, and of the 80 people that 80% of the people that completed the entire treatment program all had a 50% or more reduction and or elimination in those physiological symptoms that come up as a result of trauma. Okay. So because of that, they decided, well, let's try it out with veterans that were dealing still with like the trauma from Vietnam. So I started working with veterans that had gone through Vietnam and working with them to, again, reduce all those trauma symptoms so that your body's kind of able to go back to its own homeostasis, decrease that fear activation. Right. And the more they saw that it was working and really helping them, then eventually the VA, the Veterans Administration, was like, oh, we really like this program. Can we have this over here to work with all of our veterans or active duty personnel in order to help them move through their traumatic experiences? Because obviously Vietnam was not the last huge conflict we've had. No. And so as a result, it's become a staple within the VA system as something that they like to use in order to help reduce all of those symptoms and decrease, obviously, the physiological effects overall. The big piece that talks about with exposure portion, this piece is the hardest part for anybody to go through, because you basically have to write down your own full traumatic event, like the worst thing that happened.
Right. Yes, you do.
And then your goal after that is now you have to read it out loud to yourself every day. And then I apologize, I didn't put my phone on silent. So then you have to read it out loud to yourself every day. You have to read it to your therapist. So the more exposure you're getting to this, it's forcing you to kind of feel those feelings, those emotions, those thoughts as you're going through it, which again, does not make people comfortable. That's why we stuff it in a box way at the back of our mind instead of cognitively dealing with it in the presence. But in order to kind of experience all of those emotions and everything else, to be able to get you to a place where, like, the more I expose you to said event, then the less your body will ultimately respond to said event. It's not easy, people. Like, let me just make that clear. It is not easy. And typically you don't like jump into therapy and be like, all right, first day, we're starting with CPT.
Right.
Like,
no,
it's a general buildup.
Yeah, it's definitely, if I had started CPT in the beginning, I would have run out screaming and run away from it and never come back to it. You have to be at a place where you're not only ready for self-accountability, but just a place where you're ready to look at the actions that happen and then hear possible alternative thoughts about how your like states of mind, person's opinions about what you have an opinion about what you should have done, how you should have acted, what you know, your beliefs, and you have to hear somebody's the alternative of it, and then be open to it.
Yeah.
And if you're not ready to do that, and starting off in therapy, very few people are ready to do that.
Yeah.
So I definitely couldn't have in the beginning.
No,
but,
it's super difficult.
And I was 9 years in when we did it, and I didn't go seeking it out. He was like, "Look, I think this might help with some of your last stuck points, and it might help because CPT's ultimate goal is for you to be able to soothe yourself, as your therapist would, for you to be able to find that way to calm yourself down, and that it will connect with other traumatic events when you find that underlying stuck point. Yeah, that you'll be able to then soothe yourself when those come up too. So
absolutely, yeah. Which it's again
easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure. And if like you've had like a happy, healthy, positive upbringing in childhood, and let's say you go into the military or you're in law enforcement, first responders type stuff, or even a home invasion, like any of the things that happen as an adult that you don't have anything from your childhood kind of feeding you negative thoughts and negative beliefs and negative emotions, it's easier to kind of go in and be like, okay, I had this one event that just happened. This is how I'm feeling about it. This is how I'm responding to it. Like, I need to work on this thing. It's going to be able to help you move through it a little bit quicker, versus having all the trauma and unhealthy upbringings that a lot of us had. And so we're carrying all that shit forward. And now you want me to do what? You want me to write it all down and then read it every day? Are you fucking out of your mind? No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. It belongs in a box in the back of my head. Just fix the rest of it. That's not how therapy works. We dig and we poke and we dig and we poke until we uncover that thing or those things. And then we want to be able to work through them so that your body stops carrying them. Your brain stops telling you that you were at fault. You should have, could have, would have done something. All of the things that we start to carry with us forward.
Well, one of the things I liked about CPT was it wasn't my therapist pointing those things out. It was him guiding me along the path to me discovering it myself.
Yeah.
And that was different than the approach that he had done in other things. And that was where I had some of those like aha moments where I was just like, oh. And we're gonna talk a little bit more in depth about my personal experience about it, because I do want people to understand kind of the process of it and how you can go through something so difficult and come out being able to not only handle that, but do worksheets when other things trigger you, and go down and be like, okay, instead of fighting, I'm going to go do a worksheet.
Right. Instead of like kicking the wall, I'm going to go do a fucking worksheet.
Right. Yeah. Instead of crying and falling down into a ball of tears, I'm just going to go do a worksheet. It makes a big difference. So,
and CPT kind of works in 12, like it's a 12 session program.
It is.
So 12 visits weekly. And once like you're done with one section, you're working on one specific, what's the phrase? One specific.
They say stuck point, but I'd say no, one traumatic event. I don't know.
Like that belief. What's that called? We were talking about it and I just lost it.
I can't remember. I don't know. I just have all my worksheets. It'll come up.
Impact statement.
Impact statement.
Impact
statement. Impact statement.
That's what it is. That's what it is. So you can do CPT again. Like you work on one impact statement at a time, and you can keep doing CPT until all the underlying impact statements are done.
Right.
So phase 1 is essentially like pre-treatment assessment to make sure that like you're in a place to do this, you're going to be okay. Like, what are your outside resources? Like, doing all the things that we want to do as therapists to make sure that you're going to be okay when you are no longer in our office or we are no longer in the video room. And kind of pre-treatment goals and issues. Like, what are some of the issues that you want to be able to work on? What do those kind of goals look like at the end, so that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that you're in a place where you can then do this work. Part 2 is like our education on PTSD and our thoughts and emotions. So this is where like sessions 1, 2, and 3 come into play. Overview of what cognitive processing therapy is and what post-traumatic stress disorder is. Examining the impact of the trauma, and this is kind of where your impact statement comes up.
Well, and before we go on, post-traumatic stress disorder, I think people should understand that there are so many different ways that post-traumatic stress disorder can affect you. You can have the memories that flood you, where you can have just emotions flood you. Mm-hmm. So what types of post-traumatic stress disorder are there, like besides saying just PTSD? When you get in, you talk to somebody about post-traumatic stress disorder, how are you outlining what type of post-traumatic stress disorder they might have?
What do you mean?
Well, like if you're figuring out for them whether it's their body flooding, or if it's that they're getting engulfed in those images and emotions, and are you helping them to understand that if they are not somebody who, for instance, has the whole visual experience,
right,
but only has the body flooding, mm-hmm. Is there time taken to then explain to that person, like, no, that's still PTSD, and this is how and why?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm meaning.
Where nightmares come into play.
Right.
Because people can be fully functioning throughout the day, but then having nightmares of this repeated event that mm-hmm. they're not sure is real, but their body keeps telling them it's real.
Right.
Your fight, flight, freeze, fawn effect, all the hypervigilance, mm-hmm. insomnia. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of insomnia is a result of trauma.
Right.
And what can we do to kind of reduce the effects of trauma? I apologize for my dog crying. No, out.
Dad, he wants attention.
He just wants snacks.
They're so neglected here.
They are. They're terribly neglected. Nobody loves these huskies.
Yeah, you should see them. They're emaciated.
But yeah, I've all of the things, everything that kind of goes with it. And PTSD is not just for war veterans. It's not just for cops on the front line. It's not just for firefighters. Like, it literally can happen to anybody, because it can be any effects of neglect, physical, emotional, mental, sexual abuse at any point in your life. Domestic violence can cause PTSD symptoms, car accidents,
experiences in the medical community.
Oh my gosh, COVID.
Yeah.
Like COVID alone caused so much PTSD in the nursing and medical area, because they had to see so many patients die day mm-hmm. after day after day. So it's not just for war.
Right.
It's like PTSD impacts probably, if you're standing in a room with 5 people, 2.5 to maybe 3 of those people have been impacted by some kind of traumatic event in their life that they still carry in their body when they think about that event.
Right. And they may not have the full, PTSD really runs more on a spectrum.
Yeah.
Because they may not have the full blown where they're, crouching in the corner, envisioning, mm-hmm. Firefighting going on, things like that. But they may be still startling every time there's a huge bang, and
yes.
And having their heart pounding and not being able to breathe, or having a panic attack or something like that. And
yep.
So, or just not even understanding, like, when that stuff happens, why they get super agitated and then react with other behaviors. Mm-hmm. Whether that's eating, shopping, gambling, drugs, any of those addictive behaviors. That's a lot of times it's linked to people who don't understand that they have PTSD and that their body's constantly being triggered.
Yes.
And then so they look for ways to detach from that reality.
Yeah.
And CPT kind of helps you reconnect with the reality of what's going on between what happened and then your body and your brain, and the reality of what the truth versus what you believe.
Yes.
But like I said, you're led there, which is so much different than a lot of other modalities in my experience. Mm-hmm. They were more like this is the belief. Here, we're going to teach you how to get there.
Right.
Versus, oh, okay, you believe that. Let's talk about why.
Right.
Well, what do you think about that? Well, what about this? And why would you have done this? And how would you have done that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and so yeah.
Working through all of those pieces that you don't think you need to work through because you're fine, right? Like, I'm fine. I don't need any help with why I react the way I do. I don't need any help with my nightmares. I don't need any help because I'm terrified to get into a vehicle and drive anywhere. Like, I don't need help with that. Like, I'm fine.
Well, I even thought, because I had done so much, I had already done the EMDR, and I was like, God damn, I don't really have a big thing to talk about, And I was like, I can think of this one thing that was pretty traumatic that, we'll talk about, and it's nothing like the other stuff, but I can talk about this. And he's like, oh, okay, that's great.
Sure. Let's talk about that.
And, 12 weeks later, I had like 30 different stuck points, and, I can't tell you how many different challenging worksheets I had on it. And then, once I rewrote my impact statement, it was like one of those aha moments of like, I see how it can work. It's just so slow going, because it's like, okay, we fixed that one. Now on to the next.
Yeah.
Versus EMDR is a little like more connective.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't take 12 sessions to work through one traumatic event. Like, you can work through one traumatic event, but ultimately, because of the reprocessing with EMDR, it's impacting all these other little events in your head. So really, it could have impacted 10 events in 1 or 2 sessions versus one particular impact statement over 12 sessions.
So people might wonder, why would you even do CPT? And the reason that is that because although that EMDR does that, it, as we talked about before, there are still things that are going to be left over. Sure. And I had things that were left over too that I didn't even realize. Yeah. And once I went through the CPT, and now I have tools where I can calm myself in situations that I didn't have before, because I went through those courses and learned them. And had I not done that, then I wouldn't have, because each week is taken, it's broken down so easily for you to digest, and there's not a lot for you to take. It's just like, okay, well, this week you're going to work on a challenging belief worksheet, and you're going to you're going to add this to it or whatever. And so there's not a lot of guesswork, and it's not a ton of homework. It's just taking the time, investing in yourself, like self-care, basically. It's basically like journaling.
Pretty much. And the reason the VA loves it so much, just like with cognitive behavioral therapy, is very structured.
Yeah.
It's workbook friendly. And those of you that know how the military works, like, we need to have a guide, a workbook, a plan. Everything has to be a little bit more structured in order for us to get from A to Z.
Right.
Do we really? No. But has it worked for all these years? I guess yes.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it has its flaws. There are times where I'm not able to, because I'm so in the moment, I'm not able to, because I don't have somebody there to guide me. I'm on my own. Yeah. I don't have anybody to help me, like, well, wait a minute, have you thought about it this way? Or what about, are you looking at all the pieces of the story? So, I don't know. I wouldn't say one is so much better over the other, although personally, if I had to do one over the other, I would choose EMDR, just because it helped so much more different topics, and just so more broadly beneficial. But the CPT, it gives you more empowerment, self-empowerment, I think. So there's something to that is super important.
And some people don't want to, they like one over the other for a variety of reasons. So there's not a right way or a wrong way to treat your trauma. The right way is treating your trauma. The wrong way is ignoring it.
Right. Correct. Yes.
But how you get to the end of you being able to work through your trauma, there's not a right way and a wrong way.
No.
It's you doing the work to get you there.
And that's true for even if you don't choose to do these courses and you figure out a different way. I mean, there are people that process their trauma in different ways and don't ever use a professional. And although it, to me, is like slogging up a mountain, in the rain without any kind of gear or anything versus somebody who's got all their gear and and they're hiking up a mountain with a guide. You can still get to the top, but one is going to be so much more difficult than the other one.
Yeah.
And you may backslide a lot more just because you don't have that support. You don't have that.
You don't have the proper tools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you also don't have that support system with you. And relying on your friends and family support is great, but they're not professionals.
Right.
Typically. I am
You're
pretty
the
lucky.
exception.
Yeah, I am pretty lucky in that. I have a few friends that are professionals, but Natalie and I chat. This goes a podcast stuff, and it ends up being like a therapy session for me. I luck out, but typically people don't have a professional that they can count on for some advice. So it's not that you shouldn't count on your loved ones, but maybe when you're dealing with the trauma stuff, maybe that's the time to bring in a professional to get that extra support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever, course.
Whatever that support looks like for you. And then you transition, once you kind of identify what your impact statement is, transitioning into, okay, now we're working with the events and the thoughts and the feelings.
Right.
Phase 3, now we're moving into like processing the trauma. So this is obviously everybody's favorite part when you go to trauma therapies, actually working on the trauma. So sessions 4 is like examining whatever that index trauma is, whatever that one is. Session 5, using the challenges, questions, worksheets. So again, worksheets.
Mm-hmm.
There's an app for that, which Joanna said at the beginning, which it is a great app. Like I downloaded and checked it out. I really like that.
There's bugs in it that make it tricky, and that's why I have a love-hate relationship with it. Like I said, like if your phone gets crushed and you have to get a new phone,
right?
None of your stuff transferred.
gone.
Yeah, it's gone. There's no way to and that is probably my biggest complaint of anything.
Because you want to be able to still have some of your work. So it'd be great if the people that created CPT Coach
if anyone's
would fix that for us and create your own login so that way it's saved up there in some magical cloud in the sky. So if something does happen to our phone, we are able to retrieve it with our next phone.
Even if it ended up being something that you had to pay for, if it was, a nominal amount, $5-10 or something like that.
Right.
I think that it would be worth it.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about your own mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
You should be able to pay for that with like your HSA accounts. Like it should be part of your healthcare benefits.
Should be. Not everything
Just throwing
is.
that out there.
Yeah.
And then we enter kind of phase 4, and this is where we're identifying patterns of problematic thinking, and then doing challenging belief worksheets and the introduction to the various models. Phase 5 is sessions 8, 9, 10, and 11, all trauma themes. That's what you're doing for those 4 sessions.
What does that mean, trauma themes?
Looking at the themes that are within your trauma that are connected maybe to other trauma, where those words of kind of your core beliefs and your values come from, because a lot of those are going to be negative. Like I'm wrong, there's something wrong with me, I'm unlovable. Where do all those come from? Like looking at all those individual pieces that are connected to the overall traumatic experience itself. Because again, you grow up healthy, happy, you have really good coping skills, and you go through the exact same trauma as someone who grew up unhealthy, no coping skills, poor parenting styles, things of that nature. You're going through the exact same experience, but how you're reacting to it afterwards and continuing to react to it afterwards is going to be vastly different.
Yes.
You are wet.
And that makes sense to me just because, my husband, although he had his own trauma just from where the area that he lived in and stuff, and just having a lot of normal stuff that kids in the 80s went through, actually. It wasn't anything that was out of the norm really in a lot of ways, but he did have some very supportive, loving parents who just were, he always knew that they loved him and they were there for him and that they were there to take care of him regardless of what he did. And that changed how he's able to react to things versus how I'm able to react to things. He's still, he's love avoidant. So he has his own issues about, like just not sharing feelings and stuff. But the ability to stay calm versus me who never learned those coping skills and had to learn them as an adult and now has to like work through them and go, I need a minute because I can't help how my body reacts.
Right.
I can't help the flood, the adrenaline flood, all that. It's not like I flip a switch. It's not like I make a choice. It happens.
Yeah.
And then I have to decide how I'm going to react. And now I have tools that allow me, but it's strange for a lot of people who aren't familiar to be like, what do you mean?
Oh, absolutely.
You need a minute. What are you talking about?
Why do you need a minute? Like, we're just having a conversation about what to get on the pizza.
Right. We just canceled our plans. What are you talking about? You know, like there are things that you struggle because, and that's part of why we do this podcast, because there are people just don't understand.
Yeah.
When you've gone through the kind of trauma that a lot of people through our generations went through, you know, the childhood abuse, the sexual abuse, and neglect, and then you add on to it the wars they've had and the exposure to that. We just have a lot of traumatized people walking around.
Oh my gosh. So
many. So, and just because you had that supportive home life doesn't mean that you are not going to do some of the really toxic behaviors of PTSD if you are struggling with it and you choose not to address it. You know, like you can't say, it's not fair to say to yourself or true to say to yourself, well, I had, you know, this loving home, so even though I went through this thing,
right,
I can handle it because I had the skills and tools from when I grew up. So all of these things that are coming up and affecting me now, those are going to go away.
Yeah.
Like, likely they won't without work.
And a lot of people will do that. Like, well, I didn't have it as bad as.
Exactly.
Like, my life's not as, like, yeah, we went through the same thing, but, like, they had it way worse.
Yes.
Like, minimizing the impact on you.
Yep. And we've talked about that before. Like, trauma is trauma.
Trauma is trauma.
If you break your arm, you've broken your arm. Yes, some are more difficult to heal than others. But when you write down on the sheet, you still got to write down you broke your arm. You know, like you still have to write down, you still have to acknowledge that you had a trauma. It's just, yes, maybe in your mind somebody had it worse, but your brain still reacted the same way.
Right. Because your body is the only body that's gone through what you went through.
Right.
So even though your friend's body went through something worse in your mind, your body's like, no, we are reacting because this is bad for us.
Right. It's similar to, you know, if you think about babies, when they start experiencing pain, like the first time a child gets a paper cut, it's like, it's like the worst pain they've ever had.
It is.
You know, they need to go to the hospital. They might need an amputation. They definitely need a whole box of Band-Aids, probably a pony. Like there's, you know, some, not all kids, but depending on how the parents react, definitely.
Right.
But a lot of kids that with those first pain, shots, that kind of stuff, because they've never experienced that kind of pain before.
Right.
For them, it is the worst pain they've ever had. It's the same thing with trauma. Your brain has still gone through a trauma and it has never experienced what it's like to go to war. So for your brain, that rape or that neglect or that car accident or that home burning down or whatever, that's the worst thing that your brain has ever gone through.
Right.
And it was a significant trauma to your brain.
Absolutely.
And so you can't minimize the damage just because somebody else went through a different experience that caused the same kind of trauma to their brain. Because when you look at them on scans, like trauma is trauma. They look at, and when people are experiencing those floods, those PTSD, it doesn't matter if you're remembering that you were left at home as a kid all the time and never had any food, or that you were in war, your brain lights up in the same places, you have the same reaction. So that's what people need to remember, is that minimizing it is not the solution.
No.
It's not the answer, and it's certainly not going to help you move past where you're at in any way.
No.
It's just going to keep you fighting any solutions because you're like, well, I don't deserve that.
And it's going to keep you stuck.
Yeah, well, that's part of the stuck points.
Yep.
It is a stuck point there that you're like, part of you is saying, I don't deserve it.
Right.
because somebody else had it worse. I don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mean, and are you done where you know wiser?
Yeah, the only other thing is just so now you're entering phase 6 at the very end, which is session number 12. So now you're processing intimacy and then the final impact statement that you're
Rewriting
making.
it. And that's what we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
So I started off, I wrote my impact statement, and I wasn't originally sure that I was going to like talk quite about this, but I kind of wanted people to understand the journey that I took, because I think I can explain it pretty quickly. So
absolutely.
When I talked about my impact statement, like I said, I kept thinking to Dave, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to think of, but I could think of this one experience, and it was my sister and I had gotten into a fight, and it was like a bickering fight over the TV, and I remember that my parents were upstairs, my mom and my stepdad, and I didn't want to get in trouble, but I also was pissed. So I took my foot and I like pushed her off the couch. So it wasn't like a kick in my memory. Who knows? Maybe I did launch her off the couch.
It was a nice little gentle
But it was,
shove.
but I shoved her off the couch, and she fell off the couch, and she ran upstairs and she told them. And my step immediately came running downstairs and grabbed me and started to try and give me discipline.
Right.
And I started wriggling and screaming and, you know, and everything. And I'm not sure if it was that my mom was home and he didn't want her to overhear that, or what decided he let me go.
Right.
But I was so proud of it. I remember I was so proud. I was like, yeah, I got out of something, you know, like I didn't get the beating because I knew it was going to be bad.
Yeah. And
so that the whole day went by, and I really thought that like I was excited that I'd gotten away with this, without, or not gotten away with, I should say, but gotten out of this discipline that was going to be over the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the next day. I was sitting downstairs and I'm watching TV, and from the back of me, he just came up and grabbed me, and before I knew it, I was upside down in the air, and nobody else was home. It was just me and him, and I got that quote unquote spanking from the, you know, middle of my knees to the middle of my back.
Yeah.
And it was bad. And I remember feeling hopeless and trapped and all these things. And that feeling has come back to me every single time that I've had any kind of restraint, or so it's something that has been re-triggered easily.
Sure.
But I somehow got the belief, because of all that I should have known that he would come back and get me because of his past behavior, and his own, the way that he's spoken to me before. And so I had this belief for all this time that like this was partially my fault. I should have known better.
Right.
And I definitely should have been more vigilant. I should have been watching.
Right.
And I went into this CPT talking, and that was my, you know, basically my impact statement was about that. And then we had to go through and start doing our steps on it. And we didn't challenge that impact statement really for a few sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, as you talked about with the different steps there, it's a few sessions before you actually get into challenge. But we talked about some stuck points. And one of the things that I found with my, let me get to them, with my stuck points is that, there's a lot of them, as you can see. I have this belief that I need to be perfect in order to not get in trouble.
Right.
And that has translated into somehow I have this belief that I need to not make mistakes or be perfect in order to receive love. Now, I didn't know that when I started this. I was like, you know, this is just about me being hypervigilant and and it took Dave taking me on a journey every week, exploring my perceptions on this. He didn't challenge my perceptions. He would ask me questions.
Mm-hmm.
He would just say, well, if that's true, then, you know, well, let me ask you this. How would you know that he was home to be able to come behind you?
Right.
I mean, if you knew he was home and you knew that you knew he was dangerous, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I knew he was dangerous. He said, okay, so then does it make sense that you would be aware and hypervigilant already if you knew he was home? And I'm like, well, yeah. I mean, he came home and I didn't know it. He said, so,
sure.
So was there a tracking device? Was there some way that you could have tracked him to know? You know, and then I would be like, I don't appreciate your logic right now, sir. You know,
Nobody does. Nobody does.
Because he would ask me questions that it was so clearly obvious that it was like, no, I couldn't. And by the end of it, I made the statement, like, oh my God, of course I couldn't have known when he would be home or that he would even retaliate.
Right.
Because had I known, I would have been hiding and running as I did every time that I knew that there was trouble.
Right.
And even if I had known either of those things, I was like a young kid.
Right.
I too young to know better and to know how to protect myself. And
Right.
these were people who were supposed to be responsible for protecting me and showing me how to be grounded and mindful and handle conflict without violence.
Right.
And instead modeled something different. So
Sure.
it makes a lot of sense when I started breaking it down, why I had a lot of the thoughts I did, why I had a lot of the behaviors I did, why I had a lot of the reactions that I did.
Sure.
And that allowed me then to start the challenging worksheets and challenge my own beliefs. So when you do a challenging worksheet, I'll bring one up here.
This app is wonderful. By the way.
It really allows you to do all the things that you do in the book, but you can print the worksheets too, which I love. But you can, for me, it's easier for me to, I have Dupuytren's disease in my hand, and it's very difficult to write. So you have it too. So
I do too.
So it makes it difficult to write. So when I use the app, I can just, use swipe sometimes, or just type it out, and it ends up being much less challenging on my hands.
Yeah.
And then I can read it versus the chicken scratch that mine ends up being when my hands get sore.
Yeah.
So it's really nice for people who have difficulty with writing or have poor writing, and need to, like, if your writing is not the best and you have to give these to your therapist, then.
Yeah. Sometimes we like to be able to actually read the work.
Yeah, it helps. So, and because there are different things, you've got the star chart, and there are different things on here that help you understand your strength of your feelings and where that feeling might come from. And they're worksheets.
Yeah.
So it's something that you can do by yourself. It's easier to do with a therapist, but this is one of the programs that I would say is the easiest that you could do by yourself because it is so guided.
And then every time you get triggered at home by anything, then that's where you're like, I can go do a worksheet. I'm just going to go do a worksheet.
That's exactly what I do.
Which is then helpful because it allows you to process through it differently than you would if you just sat there and reacted to it.
Right. And so here's one here. It says, I always feel like I'm the problem, that I'm too needy, too vain, and too emotional, and I make everything about myself. So that was my stuck point, and I didn't understand that it meant I feel like I need to be perfect to deserve love.
Right.
It took Dave boiling it down and helping me pick things apart for me to understand that that's what I was basically saying.
Yeah.
So it starts off with you describe the situation, and then I described what it was that upset me. Then you identify the stuck point. You can either create a new one, or you can use one that you've already stored in here, which is nice. You attach that stuck point to it. Sometimes your therapist has helped you figure out what your stuck point is. Sometimes you've gotten like familiar enough with this that you're like, oh, my stuck point is I feel like I'm not safe.
Right.
So you can come up with it on your own. Sometimes I didn't know what it was and I couldn't get a hold of my therapist. So mine would be a stuck point that was like a whole paragraph, and he would have to be like, oh, okay. I would read the whole thing and be like, so your stuck point is blah, blah, blah. They'd be like, yeah, you got it. That's what it is. Yes. Then they ask you to rate it, and they ask you to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then they give you emotions to kind of attach with it. You can add in your own emotions underneath, and you're allowed to add in as many emotions as you want to mine. I mean, I'm sure there's some point where it stops you, but I've added in like 20 before on one. And it allows you to with the app, what I love is it's all a one thing that you can scroll up and down the whole thing and read the whole worksheet and see
Nice.
from the beginning to the end where I started, what my original thought was, the stuck point and the
Sure.
description, and then at the end what I've reworked it into, because that's where you eventually get into. It asks you to put evidence for, and the evidence for has to be true evidence. It can't be like, well, I believe.
Right.
Well, I think.
Got to put the facts.
Right. It has to be facts. And if you can't
Yeah.
back it up with something that's like, well, he said this, or this happened, this was done,
Right.
and it's.
Right.
And that had been a few times where I was like, but it's feel. He's like, well, feel.
Right.
And that's where CPT helps you separate those two, where you're like, okay, maybe I am attaching my feelings and making them facts.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which is easy to do if that's all the evidence you've ever had is your feelings.
Yeah.
Until you realize you
until
have.
you're challenged.
Yes.
So you have to write down a fact, and it can't be attached to a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you might have a feeling attached to that fact, but your fact can't be the feeling.
Yes.
So then you get to do evidence against. And the evidence against can often be the more challenging than the evidence for.
Sure.
Because you have to write evidence why that stuck point isn't true. And you're feeling like it is true.
Yeah.
So that's the part of where we talked about like self-accountability and being able to open your mind to different perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not there, this is going to be very challenging for you.
Absolutely.
And then they asked about, is it a habit or a fact? Mine were almost always habits. Sometimes I was like, and facts, and it was true. It was a fact, but very rarely does it include all the information. And then they want you to like put in there, what information might you be leaving out? You know, and that might be that, well, I was triggered by the situation that happened, but it's also the week that I lost my dad.
Right.
So maybe I'm not remembering that information that might be a precursor to my own behaviors, my own stressors.
Sure.
You know, or that this is the week that he's got, my husband's got a huge project that's due. Maybe he's a little more stressed this week. Maybe that's why he's a little more snappish. Like, is it including all the information?
Right.
You know, so it allows you to step back and look at that. And then it asks you, you know, do you have all or nothing thinking, or are you using extreme or exaggerated wording? You know, I must, I never, I always,
right.
Or they always, or whatever. Are you only including one piece of the story? And often we are.
Which is huge, because we definitely do.
But it's so hard for us as patients to see the other piece of the story. And that's where it's so beneficial to have that professional to be like, well, what about this? For instance, when I would beat myself up about if I didn't do this for my kids or didn't do that for my kids, or something raising them. And my therapist would say, well, wait a minute, where was their father?
Right.
And I would say, well, he didn't, you know, he wasn't really around that much, or when he was active, he did this thing or whatever. He's like, well, he had this responsibility when he decided that he was going to not be in their lives. When you abdicate responsibility, you then accept that you are part of whatever happens by not being there.
Right.
And I had never thought of it that way.
Sure.
So, I never would have had my therapist not put it to me in that way. You know, that we're responsible by our absence just as much as we are by our presence.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So, and it made me think about other situations too, that maybe I was responsible by my absence and not by my presence, you know, not just with my kids, but other things. But it helps you spill into other places. And then it asks if you have a dependable source. Mine is almost always my childhood, or my mom, or, you know, some other caregiver. And it wasn't, I have a very cognizant awareness that my mother didn't try to be the negative voice in my head. She didn't know how to do anything else.
Right.
She just really did the best she could with what she knew.
Yeah.
So, but it took a long time for me to learn that. And then it asks if it's, you know, possible or likely like one of the things that I wrote in here that I rewrote is it's possible that I'm the problem in most situations, but it's more likely that it's a combination of factors, some of which I may not even control or recognize or be able to control.
Yeah.
So it's asking me, like, what are the possibilities versus the likelihood? And by the time you've gotten through the worksheet, you're able to go like, well, maybe I can look at it in a more logical state.
Mm-hmm.
And then it asks if you're focusing on unrelated details. And for me, I was focusing on that, like, it was like I was a bad kid or something. And so I deserved how I was that I was treated. And like I was born with these tendencies rather than learning them.
Right.
And then it asks about thinking patterns so that you are cognizant and aware of the type of thinking patterns. Exaggerating or minimizing, ignoring important aspects, oversimplifying, mind reading, emotional reasoning. There's a few others, but those are the ones that are attached to this one. And then it has you do an alternative thought. And my alternative thought was that, so my original thought was, I got upset about 4 things this morning that were no big deal and made it all about me because Keith never does that to me, but I do it to him. I always feel like I'm the problem and too needy, too vain, too emotional. I make everything about myself. And then I ended up being like, I had a very traumatic childhood and it caused me to learn some compensating behaviors. I don't like all those behaviors and I to work hard to unlearn them and grow and change into the healthiest version of myself. Some days are healthier than others, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And asked me what I believe that alternative thought. I rated it a 10, which is rare for me, but I do believe that one.
Sure.
And then it asked me what my original rating was on that original thought, and I had dropped it by I dropped it down to a 4 from like a 9. So, and then it asks you again the emotions that you feel attached to this new thought.
Now that you've worked through all of that, yeah.
And it's okay that you might still be sad, but I was also calm and at peace.
Yeah.
And stronger and thoughtful. And then it asks you to rate the emotions, and I was able to rate them significantly. And then this is something that when I'm having even something like that trigger, let's say I'm not able to do a worksheet, I can go back and read one.
Yes.
And just putting yourself in that mindset of sitting down and reading through it and being mindful of reading what's happening, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's true. That is, I am leaving out those important aspects.
Yeah.
There is more to the story. Where did I get this? Okay, these are habits. Where did I get them from? Being able to just look at that and not doing another worksheet can pull me out of a spiral that I previously wouldn't have been able to gracefully function in any way. It's not that I couldn't function and interact with people. I could, but I was sharp and I was always on edge and always like startling and and always worried that somebody was out to hurt me.
Yeah.
And that's changed a lot since I've done these therapies. And this one gives me so much empowerment to be able to regulate myself. Because especially my husband gives me so much grace. He's just wonderful. So if we are in the middle of a fight and I'm like, I need to do a worksheet, he's like, okay, she's going to do a worksheet now. So you're in like 20 minutes. And and he just lets me go. And I go and do a work. I might say like, I'm sorry. I need to do a work. I'm sorry. I need to go do a work. Like there are probably a lot of I'm sorry's there, but
he's like, go do your thing. Because he knows you're going to come back and you guys are going to be able to actually finish a conversation.
And I'll be so much more productive and so much more helpful and so much more open and receptive to his thoughts, his ideas, and to compromise than I am if I'm trying to fight my body and trying to keep my body calm and trying to keep it like in a certain place or trying to keep control or any of those things that you do when you go through trauma.
Yes.
And trying to keep control is one of the big ones. So, once you're able to get yourself regulated again and taking that 20 minutes, like we talked about with Gottman, 20 minutes where you're not necessarily thinking about what, or if you are, you're doing it in a mindful way like this.
Yeah.
And working through a worksheet. And then I'll sit downstairs and smoke a bowl or watch the fish tank or whatever for a little bit before I go back up there. And then, or I'll, and I'll text him in the meantime, like, I'm calmed down now. Thank you so much for your grace. I love you. He loves me, and he'll text me back like,
Yeah.
I love you. He'll tell me how proud he is of me. I don't talk a lot about what I went through on here, but he knows the
Sure.
worst. So
Yeah.
for him to just give me the grace and not have me have to beg for it is huge.
Yeah, because you're already in a place of vulnerability. You're
Yes.
already in a place of like, I'm not accepted for who I am because I would have been
I am
if
the
I was
problem. I
younger.
can't be me.
Yeah, but like he fully accepts you for who you are. You don't have to beg for his love or for his attention like you would have in the past from other people.
Right.
Because he readily gives that and sees that. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And it's reciprocated. We are very loving to each other. And that's something that people see. They talk about a relationship all the time, but we work hard on it. And a lot of that has to do with me doing this work and then him giving me the space and grace to stumble and fall.
Yeah.
And not be perfect.
Because it took you a long time to get to where you were.
Yep.
So it's not going to take a lifetime to undo it, but it takes a while to undo it. And then you can unravel some and some will be good. And then boom, something's going to throw you right back.
Yeah.
I got to work through that. And so it's a constant, continuous process of ebbs and flows.
Well,
of the good and the bad.
That memory is buried there. There's no getting around that. What you do is you learn how to live with it and process it and put it in a place where it can live without attacking you.
Right.
It's not that you erase it. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
But you can learn how to manage it.
Right.
And manage the symptoms that have come as a result of it.
Right.
So, and that's part of what CPT has done. So I'm super grateful for it. I finished up, and then for people that are wondering, so if you finish your 12 weeks and let's say you are not done with your problem, which happened to me, I'm still stuck in that problem. You can continue your, it's the last 3-4 lessons that you just keep repeating.
Yes.
And you keep doing like the challenging worksheets and keep doing the stuck points. And it's not that it's not beneficial. It is. It's slow. So in the meantime, I'm going to go back to EMDR. I'm hoping to deal with that stuck point just because I think that it will help unlock so many other things, just like the other ones have.
Sure.
And then I can ease off of the CPT a little bit, and then I will be on my way to discharging from therapy because I'm down to every other week. So
that's huge.
I know.
That's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome.
I'm very much looking forward to it. It's not that I don't love my therapist, because I do. I wish I could be his friend. I adore him.
Right.
But this will be my 10th year at the end of the year, and it's been a long slog. And this was the most challenging. This was like doing like one of those mud courses.
Yeah.
That's what CPT reminded me of, like there's no, you got to be ready to work. It's no joke.
Yeah.
It is super beneficial, and it is so empowering. And it is the longevity, the staying power is there because you learn the skills and then you're able to apply them in other places too. When I have a stuck point about not feeling safe, I can still do the same challenging worksheet as I do for one about not being perfect or something like that.
Absolutely.
So it's just being able to drill down and recognize what your stuck point is, and being in a place where you're ready to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And each of the modalities kind of that we've talked about, like each of them helps in their own way through various different things. And you don't necessarily need every single one of them.
Nope. Like
this just happened to be your journey in particular,
yes.
Which, I mean, for the benefit of this podcast, is that the right word?
Yeah, sure.
For the benefit of this podcast, it worked out well because then we were able to identify various modalities, which I've had people say, like, I really appreciate that you guys have talked about different, like, I didn't know that existed, or I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
So that's helpful with me understanding maybe what might be best for me.
Right.
And definitely understanding, obviously, the difference between counseling and therapy, but really being able to kind of find the model that's going to work best for you
Mm-hmm.
via the therapist that's going to work best for you.
And please remember that there are still so many modalities out there that I have not tried or been exposed to. ACT, ART, that's NLP, I think is one. There's another type of EFT. There's all the alphabet is used somewhere, somehow, some way.
Yes.
And they all have their benefit. They all have their place. Some are just going to be right for different people versus others. This happened to be, I got really lucky that this was the right mix for me. It was the right sequence for me. I built the outpatient program myself during COVID because I didn't want to do an inpatient program, and I was in such a terrible place I had gone through a medication change, and one of the medications they put me on, I had a terrible reaction to, and that sent me into a tailspin spiral, and it was a year and a half of climbing out of that. Because once you have one of those episodes, it's very difficult to get your chemicals in your body re-regulated because you don't know what medication you need yet.
Right.
And so it took a long time. And now I'm at a place where we're doing the podcast. I'm super thrilled to be at the end of modalities, but I'm so grateful to have experienced all of these so that I can share them with people and talk to people, because I've had people ask me about what it's like, or which I've gone through this. Do you think this one might be, or this one might be? And I can only tell them with my experience.
Right.
I would always refer somebody to a professional to best diagnose what type of therapy, but I have had enough experience in each type of modality that I have some familiarity now to talk about it comfortably, and to be able to maybe give a little bit of advice, but definitely to give some comfort to other people, some support.
Yeah. Which is huge because people need it.
Yeah, we just don't have enough in our society. Mental health care is difficult to ascertain. A good mental health care is that's affordable.
Yes.
It's difficult to obtain.
Yeah, so. I agree.
Yeah. So, for me, I'm glad that this is where we're finishing up with our modalities. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to go next week. If we're going to talk about crisis, or if we're going to talk about the adult chair, or if we're going to, because we got a lot of different
plans.
Topics. We have so many different topics.
We just got to organize them and put them in the way that's going to, I guess, maybe make the most sense.
Yeah, as best we can, anyway.
Yeah.
First 10, anyway.
Yeah. I think we did pretty good considering this is our 10th episode.
I know. 10, 10 episodes for all.
So we'll see what the next 10 brings us.
Yeah.
I like this.
I'm mad at it. So, well, I don't know if Jason has any questions. He's blacked himself out. So.
That's true. He's been hiding from us this whole time.
Yeah.
Jason, what say you, sir?
Well, listen. The one thing that I appreciate about your guys' show here is that you break this down in a way like you're putting your bullet points out there, and then you're following up with examples with how it has affected you personally, how it can be perceived professionally. So we're getting both ends of the spectrum in real time.
Right.
That's the feedback that I personally get from your show. You bring your topic on here. You are talking about whatever it is that we're diving into, but you're using real life examples. You're not using textbook examples, because when people are feeling like they're being fed textbook shit, they shut down. But you guys add this real life element to it, and I can appreciate that. I do want to take this moment, though, my time here on this episode. I want to give a shout out of sorts to Keith, because, and like I've respected the man before, just preliminarily knowing him on a very basic level. But it seems like every episode there is an example, and he was on here on the last episode, but every episode it seems like there is an example of just how amazing this guy is. And I fully believe, Joanna, that a good portion of where you're at in your journey here can be attributed to him.
Sure.
Because of his support, because he gives you your space, because he allows you to have your moments. He doesn't judge you. He doesn't abuse you. He doesn't condemn you. There is no mind fucking going on.
Right.
I've got all the time in the world for people like that. And I want, as a man who has, I have experience with being with an individual who is dealing with mental struggles, we'll call it. And I can understand from his perspective how overwhelming that could be. However, he is dialed in on his wife. He has recognized what she needs, when she needs it. There is no ulterior motives other than to give her the opportunity in every realm and every possibility to allow her to do what she needs in order to overcome whatever she may be dealing with in that moment. And I appreciate that. And I just wanted to take a moment here and acknowledge that.
Well, Keith is an amazing guy. Like, Keith is the reason that I started to learn self-value, because nobody had ever, my dad was my dad was a hedonist. It was a self-proclaimed hedonist. So he loved all of the drugs. And when I was young, he did a lot of the heavier drugs, including IV heroin and things like that. And so he wasn't around a lot. But he was super loving, accepting, kind, just a wonderful man. He just couldn't put anybody else's needs before his own.
Right.
And so it left me as a child with this very mixed message thing. And I had that, and I had his parents, who were very, very loving, but they were my grandparents. And then I had a very different message from the other side.
Right.
And when Keith and I got together, it took probably about, I would say, 2 years before it sunk in, like, he really means this. He really loves me, and the other shoe's not going to drop. Like, because I'm very real. I'm who I am. What you see is what you get with me. Like, I'm like how I am on the podcast is how I am on my own. That with my friends. Not that I don't have my sharp moments, but I'm usually pretty. But I'm emotional, and I had a hard time with that value of ever feeling that worth.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, just one day realizing he was the one who gave me that gift. And from there, the trust built even greater. And it was him that I went to when I decided to do the EMDR therapy. I knew kind of what I was getting into. And so I went to my husband and said, listen, I'm cracking open a can of worms here that, is full of, like, poison and razor blades and acid, and it's going to spring out. And, like, are you okay with this?
Right.
And his response was, anything you need to heal.
Yeah.
I'm there, whatever you need. And he would get up on the days I had EMDR, he would get up early and make sure I had tea and the car was heated up and stuff. And so
he's such a good guy.
When I came home, he would have the bed ready because he knew I needed a nap.
Yeah.
Tea, like, that's the guy. Now I take care of him, but
sure,
he taught me that I deserved that, because I had always I took care of everybody trying to get their love.
Right.
Keith was the first person that allowed me to heal myself without giving him anything.
Right. And still continuously giving you his love.
Yes. And now, as he's going through his challenge, which we will talk about probably fairly soon, actually, he's getting pretty ready, but I have had to give him the similar support where I've had to be there for him through his counseling and help him through some difficult times, some difficult things about self-esteem.
Right.
Remembering the support he gave me is I think critical in helping me to like amplify even what I give to him.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
So, but I appreciate that that's noticed and that you noticed that, Jason. He's a wonderful guy. I couldn't speak highly enough of him. I picked up the right guy at the bar. Let's just say that.
Makes all the difference in the world because, a lot of what you just said here in terms of what he does for you because he knows this, he's anticipating your needs. He knows you're coming home. He knows you're going to need a nap. He has your bed ready. You getting ready to get up in the morning. He's got your tea ready. The car is warming up. I love that shit. And like that's stuff that I have done with, my significant other. I don't even know how to fucking phrase it at this point, but be that as it may. But I understand having that mentality of anticipating your partner's needs and then to have it turned back around and thrown back in your face because for whatever reason, it didn't register the way you intended it to. You use the phrase, the other shoe dropping. I use that phrase all the time. And especially with that situation. Like, I don't know what else I can do to prove to you that I'm not only going to not drop the shoe, I've thrown the motherfucker away. Like, we don't even have, we don't have the possession of the other shoe because it's a non-factor. I'm here for you, with you, let me in, okay? Now, I talked this past week on the flagship show about a 50-50 partnership relationship that, some days it's not always going to be 50-50. It's going to be 80-20, 70-30 or whatever. But that's what makes the relationship work is when you two are both dialed in to each other, to your needs, to your wants, to whatever the case may be. You've put it on full display in this realm. And men and women for that matter, because this is not a sex exclusive thing. Like if you are human, you have the potential to be dealing with something. And as long as you have a partner that is understanding, that is patient, patience is a huge one. As long as you have all these little nuances that by and large are trying to be swept under the rug in this day and age, it's refreshing to know that it is on full display that this is still a thing. And this is what every couple needs to dial into if you or your partner is dealing with some internal turmoil on any level. So that's why I wanted to, and I am a huge advocate for all of it. So
that's why we talk about this, is because Jason, this wouldn't work if Keith just gave me all of the grace and the love and the comfort and the anticipation, and I gave him nothing back.
Absolutely.
And I was
you're on borrowed time.
And I just sucked it all up. And, I have, and it's not that I have to, I want to reciprocate to him what he gives to me. So it may be that I'm making sure that his clothes are folded and put away where he doesn't have time to do that. And it's not something that he asked me for, but when he realizes I did it, he's like, oh my God, thank you so much.
Right.
I didn't even think about that. Or that I realize he's low on shaving cream or something like that. I'm anticipatory of his needs, but in different ways. And I'm also super grateful and I'm aware of what he gives me. And I don't take it for granted.
That's it.
I know that to not have that. And I really try hard not to take for, and if I notice that he's feeling taken for granted, because you can tell when somebody's feeling taken for granted if you pay attention, I immediately will own it and be like, I'm sorry, I'm not acknowledging that you just made dinner for us and stuff. And I'm being gripey about what TV show we're watching. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. How can I help? Do you want to do dishes together? Whatever it is, like, we try and anticipate each other's needs and appreciate what the other brings to the table.
Yeah.
Even though it might look different.
And it's hard for people to remember those things when we're in a bad place.
Yes.
Or our partner's in a bad place.
Which is where those breaks come in.
Absolutely. So it's like, we still have to remember, like, this is the person we chose. This is the person that we love. And even though everything is blowing up right now, underneath it all, this is still your person.
You chose them for a reason.
So if you're not going to treat a stranger this way or an acquaintance this way, why are you treating your person this way?
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So that pretty much, I think, brings us to the end of everything that we had to say. But I think that that's a good message to end on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just remembering.
I totally agree, and I appreciate the fact that you acknowledge what your husband brings to the table. Because as somebody that has been on the opposite end of that,
sure,
like, listen to you talk to him about him like that, like, it puts a lump in my throat. Because that's what the fuck I wanted, and I never got it. And
not yet.
You want to, well,
but if you're not with somebody who's able to even appreciate who they are, they can't appreciate who you are, Jason.
Yeah.
Well, right. You're right about that.
A huge part of it. I couldn't do this 5, 6, 7 years ago.
No.
It took a lot of work, a lot of therapy. It wasn't that I didn't recognize it, but I didn't know how, but I didn't think I deserved it.
Right.
So I actually got angry at it and would lash out at it because I didn't feel like I deserved it. And I didn't know that that's what I was doing until I got into therapy and we started breaking it down, but it takes a while and it takes a professional outside of all of it who doesn't have any of those biases or anything that can just be like, listen, I'm objective and this is just what I'm seeing. And this is my observation. And if you're willing and open to listen to that, and that's the problem. So a lot of people are just not ready to listen. They're just not there. It's too painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I think this was a good episode.
I agree, as they all are, and it's going to be well received. I have no doubt. Your growing legion of fans are going to resonate.
Yeah, love it.
All right.
Well,
as we put a bow on this episode, we want to remind everybody, if you have any kind of feedback, reach out to the ladies on their Facebook page. Look for Shh, We Don't Talk About That. Or you can send an email through the pfcnetwork.net, the official website of this network and all the shows under our umbrella. This show has its own subpage, as it were. It's still we're still tweaking it a little bit, putting more bells and whistles on it. It's a process, but we're getting there. So, Joanna Barnes, Natalie George, always a pleasure to sit here with you ladies and listen to your wisdom, listen to your experiences, and listen to you save the world one person at a time, which I told you for a while, like, I got the best seat in the house for it. I've got the front row seat. So you guys are doing amazing work, and I appreciate you both.
Thank you, sir.
Not all heroes wear capes, man.
That's right.
Although I kind of wore one today.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye, Jason.
All right. With that, we'll see you next time right here on Shh, We Don't Talk About That, here on the PFC Entertainment Network.